intermediate Twitter tutorial, which will just take you through the ins and outs of how to use Twitter to actually build a following as a business. You should have watched the basics tutorial before this, which just talks you through the real fundamentals for Twitter. And after you've watched this, that's a really good time to go and watch the shorter tutorials where we actually show on Twitter live time some of these things, how to actually do them. So go and have a play around once you've actually read this before you move on to the advanced tutorial. So the first thing to do, say you've set up your Twitter account, you have quite a clear idea about what it is you're trying to do and who you're trying to reach, and you've got the basic understanding of how to write good tweets. This is a sort of more of a step-by-step how to then build a following. So the first thing to do really, you're looking at your tumbleweed Twitter account where you've got no followers and you're not following anybody, and that can actually be quite depressing. So the first thing to do really is to follow the right people. So first things first, follow your competition if you're a business. So you want to be keeping an eye on organisations and businesses in your space. You can also learn from what they're doing, and you can actively target their followers who are highly likely to be interested in what it is that you are also offering. And at a campaign level, this is much more about organisations that have similar sorts of campaigns to yours. So make sure you're kind of following all of those people. And then particularly organisations whose content you can learn from, but also that you can share with your followers. Because it's, if you remember the recipe, it's 4 cups of great content to 2 cups of product promotion. So you need to be sharing lots of great content from other people so you don't look like you're doing the hard sell on Twitter. And quite a good gauge for this are news providers generally, trade and industry news. So what we mean by that is if you're a cafe or a restaurant, you would follow food magazines. If you were a clothes shop, you would follow people like Vogue and things like that. And also helpful organisations that you can learn from. So if you're a business, maybe people that put out information and advice for small business organisations. But if you're running campaigns and advertising campaigns and things like that, you could also follow other PR agencies who put out helpful and information comment about best practice on social media, best practice in advertising and marketing and things like that. So just think quite wide ranging in terms of like what you think you can learn from. There's also individuals whose content you can learn from. So the previous one was more that organisational level, but this is more individual people. So for sure, bloggers, whatever business you happen to be in or whatever campaign, there will be bloggers. There's so many of them out there. There are bound to be bloggers around your product or campaign, however niche it happens to be. Also individual journalists, because of the learning element of Twitter that we've talked you through. Journalists were very quick to cotton on to Twitter, actually. They find out all sorts of things that they then chase up and end up writing up into news. And then there's what people have named the Twitterati, and that's just people that have just got loads of followers that have been on Twitter for ages. They are basically following the recipe and doing a brilliant job. And they're quite influential. A lot of them have got thousands and thousands and thousands of Twitter followers. And I'm not talking about celebrities, although celebrities will play a part. And yes, there might well be celebrities to follow who are individuals. So if you're a clothes shop, then you might well follow very stylish celebrities that fit with your brand. If you've got a shop that's very much aimed at the younger market, you could have the Olsen twins on there. If you've got a shop that's named at the older market, you might have Helen Mirren. So think quite laterally about individuals that you might want to follow. And then there's basically people in your locality at an individual and an organisational level. So for sure, straight up local news and local hubs and their followers. And there will often be, your standard local press in Hackney. We've got the Hackney Gazette and we've got the Hackney Citizen. And then there's slightly more interesting operations that do it, or maybe started off doing it a bit more for fun. And now they've realised that they're making a bit of money out of it. And they can advertise and things on their site. So we've got the Dalstonists who do, they're not strictly press, but they put out lots of interesting and comment about Hackney and the area of Hackney. And then local organisations. So in Hackney, if you're a cafe or a restaurant, as well as following other cafes and restaurants, you might follow local shops because their followers are likely to be local. So it just makes sense to kind of widen the net and just follow people that are in and around your area. And it's all about a smart way of reaching potential customers. And then follow the right brands. So if you've got a real understanding of who your customer or your target person is, have a think about who they are and who else do they interact with. What and who else do they buy? So if you're a clothes brand and you know that you're kind of the sort of person you're after is, you've got a high-end boutique perhaps. The person that you're after is reasonably well off. You're selling quite top level goods, and you've got mainly sort of 30s to 40s. Then you've got quite a clear idea of who your customer is. So then you think, okay, what else are these people into and following? Well, they're quite into. They've got a lot of money and they like the high lifestyle. So they're also probably following and buying and interacting with homeware goods because they've got beautiful houses and they like that stylish lifestyle. So there's lots of brands that are in and around that space. And then it's what other kind of clothes shops do they interact with, and they're probably highly likely to, if they're into your kind of fashion, be interested in other kinds of fashion in your space. So go and follow those people. And then they might also, if they like the high lifestyle, be quite into food. So really lovely restaurants, top restaurants in your area. So just have a real try and put yourself in the shoes of that person and try and understand as much as possible about them, and then think about the kinds of other brands that they interact with. And then if you follow them, you can then also reach your target customers. So what does that look like if you're a cafe or a restaurant? So you would follow other cafes and restaurants. You'd also follow food pop-ups and things that are trending, because pop-ups and supper clubs are very, very trendy. So just to be seen as a bit of an authority in your space, then you would probably follow those. You'd also follow food markets and local food producers, and that's a way to reach real foodies. You might also follow famous chefs and food bloggers. You'd follow food press, food magazines, and also individual journalists. And then you might also follow providers of useful business advice for you. So as a reminder, what you might do if you were a clothes shop, you might follow other clothes shops in your area and also big brand clothes shops. Then you might follow influential people in the space, so models, fashion designers, as I've mentioned, celebrities. And also you'd follow fashion bloggers. You would root out and follow style and beauty press, magazines, and also individual journalists, and also Guardian Lifestyle and Guardian Style and things like that. So the sub sections of the bigger press, like the Times. So you might follow Sunday Times Style magazine, say. And then again, you might follow providers of useful business advice. So the first step is you've followed lots of people. Don't be too concerned with the fact that you don't have any followers, but you're following 500 people or you're following 1,000 people. That really scares some people, it really puts them off. But actually, when you first start Twitter, when you first get started, you're always going to be following a lot more people than are following you, and don't worry too much about that. And you can always at a later date go in and see who you're following and just unfollow the people that you are no longer relevant, people that haven't followed you back, and people that don't really share useful content and aren't really adding much to your home feed. So don't worry starting off if you've got lots and lots of people that you're following and no one is following you. That's not going to concern too many people. So once you're following all of those people, the next step really is to just put out some great tweets. So what are the kind of top tips for doing some really great tweets? Well, the first thing is, particularly when you're doing it from a business, in fact, just generally, no text speak. I know it's tricky because you've only got 140 characters, and there's a real temptation to use text speak in order to cut down the number of characters you're using, but it just doesn't look professional, and also it doesn't read very well. Most people find that quite difficult to read, and it's just not engaging, so just avoid it. It's much better to think about your tweet like a newspaper headline, so just make it very short and punchy, and that's just the way to do it, because even if you had more than 140 characters, the whole point of Twitter is that people want things that they can digest very, very quickly. I mean, that's why it's become so successful. They were quick to cotton on to the fact that people do not want to spend lots and lots of time online. They just want bite-sized chunks of information, and that is why they are doing so well, and why people, instead of perhaps reading newspapers now, they just look on Twitter because they can find out what's happening, but just really, really quickly. So the next thing is avoid overusing @mentions and hashtags. Now, at this point, you might sort of say, what the hell is an @mention and what the hell is a hashtag? @mentions are basically other people's Twitter accounts, so @digitalmumshq, @hackneysocial, and for sure you can do little shout outs to people if you're sharing content that's theirs, or in conversations. You would use @mentions, but don't just put loads and loads of @mentions in a tweet, because then it just, when you're reading it, it doesn't really mean anything. And interestingly, if you're replying to someone, the @mention is put automatically right at the beginning, so your tweet would start with @mention someone. So if I was replying to Digital Mums, it would start @mention Digital Mums. And if you've got the @mention as the first thing that you've written, then that post won't go out to very many people. Few people will see that tweet. So if you want a tweet to go out to lots of people, don't put an @mention at the front. But if you're having a conversation with someone, do, because other people don't want to see a whole conversation you're having with someone. It's kind of tedious. And then a hashtag is just a way of searching and filtering based on conversations and topics. So there are hashtags of anything and everything, because people can make up their own, but you will see that on any given day there are things trending on Twitter, and that is when people use the hashtag. So when Nelson Mandela died, there was a hashtag for Nelson Mandela, and then if you search that hashtag in the search button, then you just pull up a whole stream of all the content based around that hashtag. So that's really great. Imagine that you are running a competition. You would use a hashtag around that, which we'll go into more in the advanced tutorial. And if you've got an event, people run events and they tend to have a hashtag for that event, because it means that people can just stream any conversation that's happening live time in that event. So it's just a tag, it's a tagging system, so that you can actually tag conversations and tweets based around a topic, and then pull up all the content based around that topic at any one time and filter out all of the noise so that you're just focusing on one particular thing. So that's just the basics. Okay, now we're going to move on to retweets. Now, obviously, you're going to be retweeting a lot of content. As we've said, it's 4 cups of great content to 2 cups of product promotion. So you're going to be spending a lot of time sharing other people's content. And there's a couple of ways that you could do it. You could just press the retweet and it just goes out automatically, and it will come up in other people's home feed as a tweet from the original person. So just take, for an example, Digital Mums HQ might retweet something from Women in Marketing, and it would come up in other people's home feed as Women in Marketing, and then in very small text it would say Digital Mums HQ retweeted this. And in your Twitter feed of all the tweets that you have done, it will come up as a retweet. Now, be careful about doing lots and lots of straightforward retweets. It's very easy to do because you just hit the button and then it goes out. So it might seem like a really easy option for sharing content, but actually it just looks lazy if you do it all the time, and it can really put people off because people are thinking, well, you're not really sharing any content. So a much smarter way of doing it, which is not a huge amount more time consuming really, is that you'd hit, instead of the retweet button, the quote button. And when you hit the quote button, the entire tweet comes up as a tweet in your tweet, and you can then play around with it. So it actually gives you the text of the previous tweet. It puts an @mention of the person who retweeted it at the beginning, and then you can play around with it. So if you cut the @mention that comes right at the beginning to pop that at the end, and then you can slightly change the text, you might improve it, but ultimately you're repurposing it. I mean, you're not stealing it because you're @mentioning the person, so you're still giving a kind of a Twitter etiquette nod to the fact that they wrote the original and they shared the original content. but it's a much nicer way of just doing a straightforward retweet, and you can go and watch a tutorial about how to do that. And that's just much better because you can add your own opinion and put your spin on it. So obviously you're going to want to promote great web content, and it's always good practice to put in a link. Don't talk about some other content somewhere and not link to it. There's nothing more annoying than someone saying they've seen something brilliant on the internet and there's no link, so you can't go to check it out. Why are they sharing it if they haven't given you the source information? And then use visuals where possible, because actually, as much as on some of the other more visual networks, photos and visuals work very well on Twitter. People really like them, and there's a lot more engagement with photos. Don't put photos in where they don't make any sense, but just think about sharing photos where you can. And then, interestingly, like phrasing as questions sometimes is really nice. It just comes across as a bit more open, and it can encourage people to click through and engage with you if you're actually putting things out there as a question. Someone did some research and showed that they got more engagement if they kind of used questions. And then the next thing is within your tweets is just be very friendly. And if you're tweeting from a business, don't use I. It's very much, just imagine that it's the way you're phrasing it is from the business perspective. So it's all about us and we. And then also it's about you and yours. So just be really friendly with the kind of language that you're using. And then the next thing is within that, really bring the brand personality. So some businesses will be, you'll be much more able to be a bit cheeky with your tweets, but then there will be others that will be a bit more upmarket and a bit more professional, where you can't be quite so cheeky. You can still be funny, and being funny is really good. Not all the time, obviously, but definitely put some humour in there. But just make sure you really understand the brand and what the brand stands for and the kind of customers. For example, you might not have Harrods and Fortnum and Masons doing very kind of cheeky tweets. They might consider that inappropriate for their market, but they still might put in a little bit of humour. And then you might have a slightly younger brand. If you take someone like Topshop, for example, they can be really cheeky with their tweets. They could be much more kind of cutting edge in terms of their humour. Always be positive. Never be negative on Twitter when you're working from a business, because you are at all times representing that business. So just be really positive. As a positive space. Imagine if you're a waitress, because so much of it is about customer service and what's coming across. Just be positive all the time, and then just thank people here and there. And if people mention you in a tweet, a little favourite, and sometimes don't do this too often, but if someone follows you, particularly if they're quite influential and they've got quite a lot of followers, just say, oh, thanks for follow. That can be quite nice. And then remember, as with everything, the customer is always right. Do not get into any kind of heated debate or argument with a customer online. I mean, you shouldn't ever do it anyway, even offline, but particularly online, because everyone can see that and it is a real serious brand reputational risk. And avoid giving your own opinions, and don't get involved in anything that might be considered contentious or controversial. And so particularly avoid politics or any kind of major moral issues. Because the business is not going to be getting involved in that, and you just have to remember that it's not you that's tweeting; you are tweeting on behalf of the business. So just a couple of top tips, going back to the previous basic in terms of the 4 cups of content to 2 cups of product promotion. I'm just going to reiterate that you really need to add value on Twitter. So avoid too much direct marketing. Be very careful about that. Be a trusted source. Be an authoritative voice in your area of expertise. And then you can ask for retweets. You might have seen people saying, please retweet. And if it's particularly important, but do it very sparingly. And it's much better to actually just direct message people, so it goes through into people's direct messages, so they get it as a message, which is private, rather than it going out to everyone publicly. But you can only do that if that person is following you, because then it's almost like you're following them, they're following you. You can have a little private message between each other because you're like mates on Twitter. But if you're not mates, then you can't do that. So those are my top tips. I think the idea now really is for you to go and actually play with Twitter. Play around with it and go and watch some of the shorter tutorials if you're not sure about how to actually do things like follow people and do like tweets and things like that. So that will just show you live time. It will be me kind of talking you through Twitter and trying to do some of these different things, give you some tips. So go and check that out before you move on to the advanced tutorial. But that's the intermediate tutorial for now. Hopefully that's given you an understanding of exactly how to use Twitter.